Hey guys, and welcome to the tutorial series for the Animal Behavior Kit. In this video, we'll be taking a look at the flying animals, or the birds. And we're going to look at how to set up the bounds. These are going to be the volume where the birds can actually fly around. And we're going to look at two different flight modes, a solo flight and a BOID or group flight for the birds. So if we go ahead and jump into Unreal, you'll notice that we're still here at our tutorial level. We're actually, for the first time, not going to look at our ground animals. We're going to be setting up our birds. And if you've been following this sequentially, in the previous video, we looked at companions and we built a little course. So what I had done before the video is I just went ahead and cleared out the cubes that we had there as the kind of little obstacle course. So if you want to follow along exactly, go ahead and clear that off and make sure that your animals, your ground animals here are staying in place and ignoring. That means that they're going to be basically idling there so they don't interfere. And the first thing we want to do is we want to set up the area where the birds can fly. We always want to have control of where the birds can go. We don't want them going anywhere in the map. So you have the ability to restrict their movement in some way. So if we go over to the top level folder, we go to blueprints, and here we're going to go to AI, and we go to actors, and we go to flying AI, right? And then we see that we have a few classes there. The first one is called AI Flying Bounding Box. We're going to grab this and drop it in the world. You can kind of raise it all the way there. And this is going to be, again, the volume where the birds are going to be flying. So let's make this big. Let's say something like, I don't know, 500 by 500. Actually, maybe that's a little too big. Let's make the location 0 and 0 for the X and Y. And instead of 500, let's make this 400 by 400. That's a little bit better. And even then, that's maybe too much. Let's say 300 by 300. There you go. So the area is going to be just right above, in between the mountains there. And let's make the Z value, I don't know, 50. That's pretty good. So the birds are going to be within this volume, and notice that the birds cannot go lower than obviously this point here. So if you want the birds to be able to fly low, you can just obviously make this lower here, and then the birds will have that option. Or you can make this value higher to give them more latitude, right? So that's pretty much it, right? Let's keep things organized, and let's go ahead and move this. Right click and say move to. And we're going to create a new folder, and I'm going to call this 6 birds. And again, it's just to keep things organized. And let's click on save. And now we have a volume here for our birds. So now we're going to go and grab our bird. So go back to blueprints, but in this case now go to character, animals, flying animals, and we have BP simple flying animal. And we're going to go ahead and drag this guy here outside. And you can place him anywhere in the world, but let's go ahead and put him kind of in the middle here. And we're gonna first look at the solo flight options. That's the very simple one. And if we press F, it'll focus on the animal. You'll notice that it's very, very simple. It's actually using vertex animation. This is not skeletal animation, so it's a static mesh with a little animation that makes the mesh go up and down. That means that it is very, very efficient, but not very pretty, right? So the birds and the fish, at least for now, are meant to be very simple AI, right? They're not meant to be complex. They're meant to be put in the level to add life to your level, right? The birds are supposed to be flying above, so they're more like an accessory right now. They do have obstacle avoidance, but besides that, there's no other system, right? So all of the systems that we've looked at so far, breeding system, companion, all those things are now specifically targeted only to the ground animals. The birds right now are just if very efficient, so you can have a lot of them in your level. That may change in the future, but at least for now, that's where we are. All right, so right here we have our bird selected. Again, like pretty much everything else, you have the option to have the bird be active or not, so we're going to leave it there. The next option is, do you want the bird to have a random size? And usually you want the answer to be yes, and then you have a min and a max scale. And remember, these are percentages, so this is basically the minimum size is going to be 70% of the original size, and max scale or max size is going to be 200% or twice as big as the original size. And this is really nice because if you duplicate this, as we're going to see here in just a second, then the birds are going to be slightly different in size. So we can make this as wide as we want to add some variation. Then we have fly mode, and you can see here that we have flock and solo. Flock, it's in parentheses, says it's heavy, right? It's very expensive performance-wise, or solo, which is very light. So we're going to keep it at solo. And now we're going to go to the solo flight section here, and we're going to select our reference for our bounds. So if you click here at the drop down, you'll see that we have the bounding box that we just added, which is this guy right here. But again, if you have a really massive level and you have several bounding boxes, meaning you want to keep certain birds restricted to certain areas, right? Maybe you have a biome. You probably will have different bounds. So you may want to choose the correct bounds here for your bird. Then you have some options here like velocity, solo flight velocity. And we're not going to touch this for now. I just want to get the bird flying. Then you have new location threshold. This is the distance that the bird will consider to basically be success when it reaches its new location. So basically what's going to happen is that the bird will be flying at this speed, 1,000 Unreal units, and it's going to pick a random location within this volume, and it's just going to fly towards the location. And then when it's, in this case, at least 400 units from that location, it'll basically consider that the location was reached, and it'll pick a new location, and it'll then go to that new location. Then you have the option of having this guy avoid obstacles, and it's on by default. If you want to squeeze as much performance as possible, you can disable this, and that's one less collision check that this is doing, right? So if the birds are really high in the sky and there's no reason to ever check avoidance, right? They're never going to have any kind of obstacle. You can uncheck it. You can have wait at destination in seconds, right? It'll reach its destination. It'll wait, in this case, 1 second, and then it'll leave and get a new location. You can make this 0, you can make this 10 seconds, whatever you want. Then you have the option of having it active on proximity. So the birds, even though they're simple, they still have their own proximity system to the player. So what we're going to do here is that we're going to continuously check to see if we're close to the player, and we're going to check for a distance. In this case, it's a radius. Remember, this is the same as the ground animal. We're going to do a sphere trace, and the radius is going to be 40,000 units, so it's a massive sphere trace. And we're going to do this check every 10 seconds, right? So the reason why it's so massive is because if you have the bird really high up in the sky, you need to make sure that the trace is hitting the floor, because usually the player is going to be on the floor, right? If you make this distance really small, you may see the bird kind of be stuck in the sky without moving. We're going to test this in a second. Home base, we're not going to take a look at this right now. This is going to be part of the day-night cycle video we're going to do later. And then these are some debugging options here. And then we have what we call a tick frequency. And we're actually not using tick, we're using a timer to move our actor. But this is the frequency of how frequent are we going to update the actor. So 0.015 is very close to about 60 frames per second, right? If you want it faster, you can certainly make it faster, but this is kind of the default of how much is going to update the actor. So right now, if we click on play, you'll see that I'm kind of looking up. You'll see that the bird is just going to be flying around. And this is going to fly around. And when it reaches its destination, let me just eject here. Whoops. So we can kind of follow the bird. You'll see that it's just going to go to its new destination within the volume. And when it reaches its destination, it'll pick a new location. All right, looks like the location was pretty far. There you go. See, it waits 1 second, and then it goes to its new location and it kind of turns around. That's what I wanted to kind of show you guys. So obviously, one bird, not a lot going on here. So let's go ahead and actually move it to the birds folder. Move to birds. And now we're going to go ahead and duplicate this guy. So if you focus on him, press Alt, and we're going to drag, and you can see that now we have more birds. Actually, let's space them out a little bit more so they have some space. And now I'm going to select all of the birds, and I'm going to duplicate, 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 duplicate. And now I'm going to go ahead and select all of the birds again. In this case, we have 24, and I'm going to duplicate them by pulling them down once and pulling them up once. So we have 72 birds. The reason I want to do that is obviously because I want to show you that it's really possible to have a lot of birds here. So again, let's go ahead and select them one more time all the way down. And pressing Shift, you can select them all. And I'm going to duplicate them one more time here. And now, if I press play, I'm going to maximize here. You can see that the birds are going all over the place. And if I show my FPS, you can see on the top right corner that we are pretty close to 120 frames per second. So these birds are very, very light on performance. They're actors, which is the most basic class. They're very simple, and their movement is also very simple. Right? We're just doing a global offset on a timer. And when they reach their destination, they just move around. Right now, you saw that bird there. They have obstacle avoidance. But again, if you wanted to make it really, really as performant as possible, you can disable collision on the mesh and take avoidance out. And then, you know, there's no collision avoidance. But you can see that they're just flying around within the volume. All right. Remember that we have a proximity number here. So if we spawn all the way here, for example, I'm going to eject. They're still flying around. I think that the distance is a little too much. So let's go ahead and select all of the birds here. Just want to show you that for a second. And we changed the distance from 40,000 to maybe like 10,000. That's obviously much smaller trace. And now if we spawn all the way here and we eject, you can see that the birds are literally standing still. They look like they're moving, but that's just the vertex animation. They're still in the exact same formation as they were before, even though we're at runtime. So again, I'm going to start getting close. You can see even from here that distance is still bigger than 10,000. But as I get closer and closer, you'll see that now they move again, right? Because I got close enough. So play around with that distance. Maybe 40,000 is too much. You know, if you really want to squeeze performance, make that number slightly smaller. But just keep in mind that you don't want to make it too small, because then the player may actually see that transition between the birds just standing still and then starting to move, right? And even here you see that the birds that are nearby here are working, but the ones farther you can see are still standing still. So clearly 10,000 is way, way too small a number. So you need to definitely increase that number to something a lot bigger. All right, so that's the solo birds. I'm going to actually delete all these guys except for one for now, because now we want to look at the group behavior, or the BOIDs, right? And we're going to go back to the original guy here. And basically, BOIDs are, this is actually an algorithm that was created by somebody, I forget his name, Reynolds, I think is his last name, way back in the 80s. And it basically tried to describe how birds or flocks of animals move around in a natural way. So what I did is I actually tried to implement the actual algorithm in Unreal, but because I'm doing blueprints, it was very, very slow. So I actually had to get creative, and I did something a little bit different. So even though I call it BOIDs, they're not technically pure BOIDs. They still have the same principles as far as automatic avoidance, but instead of being completely autonomous, they all share one common target. And if you look at the sky and you look at birds, usually they'll be flying together, but they'll be flying towards a target. And also, there's going to be some trickery in how I'm updating the BOIDs, and you'll see that in a second here, to keep frame rate high. So let's go back to Animal Behavior Kit, the top, go to Blueprints, AI, Actors, Flying AI, and we're going to grab the BOID Flight BOID Manager. And we're going to drop this guy right here in the middle. And this blueprint is basically the manager for a specific group of birds, or BOID, right? Let's move this guy to the birds folder. And this is very similar to the group manager, if you've seen that video before, right? If you have a group of animals using the group system, there is a manager, and that manager helps them share behaviors, etc. So what this guy is doing is it keeps track of all of the voids that have registered to it, and it gives them a common target, and it updates them individually. So the first thing we'll see here is under Setup General, again, whether it's active or not, you have to select the bounds. We're going to select the same bounds here. We have target update frequency and stationary time. This is basically, again, this manager is going to pick a random target within the volume, and it'll start moving the target from its current location to their new location. And then when it gets to that location, it'll wait for, in this case, 1 second, and then it'll update the target again, every 4 seconds. So in this case, every 4 seconds, it'll pick a new target, it'll move the target from its current location to that location, wait for 1 second, and it'll constantly be changing the target. And you can see the target, which is this purple ball here, or you can hide it by having the target visible boolean. Then you have some other settings here, but before we do that, let's just go ahead and click on play so you can see this guy moving around. So click on play. Oops. And you can see that we have this target that's just moving around in the level. this guy is again moving smoothly within the volume that we have set up earlier. And you can see that it's just picking a target every 4 seconds. It waits 1 second and then it chooses another target. That's all it's doing. All right. And you saw a little message flash, something about the day-night cycle. And that's because on the active settings we have by default, on the day cycle settings we have by default use day cycle. So we're going to disable that because we're not going to use that system in this video. We're going to do that later. And now if we hit play, no messages is found, right? All right. So now that we have this set up, we're going to go back to our bird, our flying animal here. And here we're going to say, actually, instead of fly mode, instead of being solo, we're going to have flock, which is or heavy. And all of these settings, you can leave them as this, but all of these settings then will be disregarded. And now we actually have a component right here called comp BOID. And if you click on it, now you'll see that we have some options under setup. The first option is what's your flock manager? Click on the little arrow and select fly BOID manager. Again, every single BOID group needs to have its own manager. So in this case, we only have one group. We're going to select that. Then we have some options like random velocity. We're going to select a random velocity. And we're going to have the initial velocity be about 8,000 in the x-axis. And then max and min, we're going to have a velocity between 6,000 to 15,000. And an awareness radius of 300. Now we're going to clone this animal. So let's go ahead and select it again. And we're going to clone it. We're going to clone it again. And then we're going to clone it to this side and clone it to this side. And then we're going to grab the last 3 and we're going to clone them and put them like this. And now, if we hit play, notice that the birds are flying together towards their target. Oops. So obviously you want to make sure that the target is not visible in the game, but this is more of an illustration, and you can see that the birds are automatically doing obstacle avoidance. They're moving all of them towards the target, but they're using the principles of Reynolds's void algorithm, which means they're all going to try to keep a specific distance from each other. So let's go ahead and eject here. Oops. Let's click play and eject so you guys can see this a little bit better here. You can see that they are moving around all towards the target. And this is not, this is not exactly scripted. They can actually change positions as they're moving around. So there's no set position. They're all organically changing positions as they go to their target. There you go. And notice that my frame rate, if I click on possess, is still pretty good. It's still close to 120 frames per second. And the reason for that is because what I'm doing here is actually updating every single void member one at a time. And this is what you have here as the void update rate. Every 0.02 seconds, this manager will grab one of the members of the void and it'll update its position towards the goal. And what this is doing very, very fast is just basically cycling through all of the voids one at a time and moving them. That is why you can keep the frame rate so high. If we have the voids all updating at the same time and we have a big enough group, the frame rate would actually drop significantly. I have a 1070, which is a pretty decent graphics card, and with 2 or 3 void groups in a scene, I was getting drops for like 10 to 15 frames per second just having the birds in the scene. So this is, in my opinion, a pretty clever workaround. You can make this even faster if you want to, like every 0.1 seconds if you want to make it smoother. But honestly, because they're going to be far away, you're not going to notice that they're actually moving one at a time because it's happening so fast. So let's go ahead and create a new group real quick to drive the point home. I don't want this video to be too long, so let's just go ahead and clone the void manager, and we're going to have a second void manager here. Same settings as before, and we can clone. We're going to grab one of these animals here, and we're going to clone this guy. We're going to move him to another location here, and we're going to make this guy a little bit lower. And here, go to the comp void component, and we're going to change the reference to the second void manager, which is this new one here. Remember, they're in a new group, so they need a new manager. And we're going to do the exact same thing. We're going to clone them. Grab the last three, the last three animals here. We're going to clone these guys here. And we're going to clone them again. We're going to make this group a little bit bigger. And now, press play. And notice that you have two different groups of birds. These guys are going all over there, and these guys are following their own target. Notice also that the birds have different sizes, and that's because the random size option was selected. And look at these guys going over there. In my opinion, keeping the group size relatively small works best. It's probably better to have several different void groups in your scene as opposed to have like one massive group as far as performance. So you can see there. All right. Let's drive the point home, and let's grab these two managers and disable or hide the targets. And now let's grab one animal here, and we're going to clone him. And here we're going to make sure that we go and select solo flight, and we're going to clone him many times. And now we have two individual groups that have their own managers, and then we have a bunch of other birds that are solo flying. And now when we hit play, now we have something a little bit more interesting, because we have some birds that are flying individually, so you can see there, and some that are flying as a group. And now when I hide the targets, you can see that now we have what appears to be a bit more natural behavior, right? And these guys are kind of standing still because I was too far away. I forgot to change the number there, but you get the point, right? The birds are now either in groups or they are solo flying. And that's pretty much it. That's how you set up your birds. It's fairly simple. Again, this is meant to be a very simple system, but you can see by the frame rate here that it's very, very efficient. In the future video, we're going to be looking at what the heck this is, a home base, and that's going to be when we look at the day-night cycle. So that's pretty much it for now, guys. Thank you so much, and I'll see you in the next video.